Some may argue it was the decade fashion forgot. Big hair, big shoulder pads, and some very questionable outfits, but unquestionably an action-packed decade. We had some of our most iconic news stories. A famous detective made his mark, and channel television was moving up in the world. But first to Detective Sergeant Jim Bergerac. John Nettles' smooth style combined with the show's easygoing plot and the glorious setting of Jersey made the series a big hit. He wasn't the only famous actor enjoying life in the Channel Islands though. Guernsey resident Oliver Reed was as well. He enjoyed keeping our reporters on their toes too.
I gave up drinking for about a month. Well, I gave up exactly for a month. How long? 20 years ago. And so I thought it was about time that I gave it up again. So I'm giving it up for 6 months this time, see what happens.
And how long have you been not drinking then?
Oh, I'm not an alcoholic. 11 days.
Arguably the biggest star of the decade though was a 28-stone gorilla. Yambo became a hero for his reaction when a child fell into the enclosure. The 5-year-old was unconscious and had broken an arm and fractured his skull. But far from being in further danger from the silverback, Yambo protected the boy until further help arrived. That story may have grabbed the most headlines, but it was the storm of '87 that had the most devastating effect.
This tree has been unceremoniously ripped to pieces. A large part of it has fallen on this car, apparently writing it off. It's typical of the type of damage caused throughout the Channel Islands last night.
Hundreds more trees were blown over, roofs were ripped off, and businesses shattered by the effects of nature. Days before the storm, another huge story was just developing. Husband and wife Nicholas and Elizabeth Newell disappeared after dinner with their 2 sons. But what began as a missing persons inquiry quickly became a murder investigation, and it proved difficult to solve.
You can't bury 14 stone and 12 stone easily and not leave a trace, can you?
Seemingly you could, as it was more than 5 years before the Newell's son Roderick was found guilty of their murders. His brother Mark was convicted of helping him to cover up the killings. The 80s also saw channel television moving up in the world as they swapped their Rouge Bouillon base for a plush new pad at Le Poucalet. The tourism boom continued as hundreds of thousands of visitors flocked to the islands in the 80s, and why wouldn't they? Pontins were in their prime, and the islands were hosting classic events like the regional final of the Disco Dancing Championships. Not sure there's moves like that in the clubs of St Helier or St Peter Port these days, but they did have their place in the decade which just about had it all. The dodgy fashion, the top celebrities, and some of the Channel Islands' most memorable news stories.